All right, we're live. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll let people continue logging in. We got about a minute left, and then we'll get started. All right, it's 9 o'clock on the dot. We'll get started. My name is Amanda. I'm the communications specialist at the New York State LTAP Center Cornell Local Roads Program. Today we have Marty doing our webinar. David is off at some conference. So Marty will be presenting on highway department duties and responsibilities. But before we get to that, we're just going to go over a few things. The chat is disabled. So if you need to communicate with Jody or myself, you can put it in the Q&A. This is also how you'll ask Marty any questions you have about the presentation. We do have some polls we're going to go over real quick. And if you, even though the chat is disabled, if you want to pull it up, I'll be putting information in there that pertains to Marty's presentation. If you can't access it because of firewall restrictions, you can send me an email. I'll put that in the chat as well. So the first poll we have is I work for. So the options are town, county, city or village, state or federal, tribal, private, or the weekend. Personally, I work for the weekend. Right. Looks like we have a good mix today. 42% town, 26% county, 21 city or village, tribal, and private. Next one we have is my job is. So you could just pick one: administration, highway superintendent / DPW commissioner, engineer, field crew, board member, or none of the above. If it's none of the above, if you can throw it in the Q&A. Hey, thank you guys for being on it today. So looks like 37% highway super or DPW commissioner. We have some engineers, administration, some none of the above, and some field crew. And then our last poll for the day, general foreman, some of the other. Last poll for the day is years in current position. We have less than 1 month, less than a year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and 11 to 20 years. All right, got a good mix. We have less than 1 year, and we have some 11 to 20. So with that, I will throw it over to Marty, and if you need anything, just throw it in the Q&A.
So good morning, everyone. I welcome to Highway Work 2024. We're going to do our highway duties and responsibilities as we start the year out. Started off on a good note. Let's see. Just a little. And I'm not being able to make this move. Here we go. So I was with the Town of Reading Highway Department for 38 and plus years. 15 years as the highway superintendent. I retired in 2015. I spent 11 years on the New York State Association of Town Superintendents of Highways Executive Committee. I was a president in 2014-15. David encouraged me to become a circuit rider in 2016. I've been there to present time. I traditionally do running your highway department workshops. We rethought a reducing liability workshop last year. Did it from a little different perspective, from not necessarily from a lawyer's perspective, but maybe from a highway superintendent's perspective. I do that with Michael Nowak from downstate. And we're in the process of rewriting the powers and duties workshop that will probably be put together under a different title than that. So department responsibilities. There are a multitude of things that a highway superintendent is responsible for. Some is obvious is road and street construction and maintenance, but some departments have other duties as well. You might have water and sewer, you might have cemeteries, parks, vegetation management with things such as herbicides, traffic signals. You know, I was downstate with the executive committee a number of years ago in the town of Shelter Island, and they actually were responsible for navigation lanes along New York's Atlantic coast. There are a lot of things. I mean, not everyone wears the same hat every day, but it's one of those things where everybody has a lot of things they do in common, but some people have specialized things as well. So first of all, your duties and responsibilities are going to be things like records. And I put that at the top of this slide because it probably is one of the more important, or if not the most important thing that you're going to do. It's going to help you in the long term as far as planning. It'll help you in the event of litigation. Should you be taken to court over something that may have happened in your jurisdiction? I can't stress it enough. If you're doing a good job of taking care of your records, attaboy. If you're not, I think it's time at the start of the new year, it might be a good idea for you to make a bigger effort to keep them as well. You're responsible for the highway right away. Obviously, that's, you know, from ditch to ditch, or if you're in a street from curb to curb. There's a lot of things that go on in the right of way, and you have to make sure that you're constantly aware of it. As you're touring your highway system, keep a sharp eye out for things that may create liability for your municipality. They can't say enough about keeping a sharp eye out, and it probably is a good idea for you to train your personnel to keep a sharp eye out as well. Not just necessarily work for the weekend, but work to make sure you keep an eye on the liability aspects of things that go on in the highway right away. You're responsible for notice, and I will talk a little bit about notice as far as actual notice, written notice. It's one of the ways that you can protect your municipality by having everything in place as it should be. You're responsible for payrolls and vouchers. You may have a payroll clerk, but if you're a town person, you sign the vouchers, you're saying that what we got, we're paying for what we've already received. You're not paying ahead of time. You know, that all those bills are good and true, and you received goods and services for what you're paying for. You're responsible for restricting and closing roads, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. You're responsible for liability and risk. And we talked about that, you know, just a minute ago when I talked about highway right-of-way. Make sure you keep a sharp eye out. And you're responsible for annual reports. There's a number of them that you're responsible for. Day one, records, what to keep, where to keep them, and how long to keep them. I can't say enough about the records thing. Do it and do it well, especially if if you end up going through an audit, if you have the proper records in place and you've kept proper records, the audit will be smooth and in the way it should be. I remember a number of years ago now, one of the last years I was a superintendent, we got audited by the state, and she gave me the auditor gave me a list of things that she wanted on. It was 5 or 7 different things, and about 20 minutes later, I went in and I put them down on the desk for her, and she says, "Well, what is this?" And I says, "It's the stuff you asked for." And she says, "You have it done already?" And I says, "Well, it's because it's, I knew exactly where all the stuff was." She says, this is the first time I've ever seen this. Anybody would have all that stuff in that short amount of time. If you keep good records, it'll pay dividends long term. So what kind of records should you keep? Well, at a bare minimum, you should be keeping record of what the weather is on a daily basis, what the road conditions are, employee attendance. If there are vehicle crashes within your jurisdiction, make sure you make note of those kind of things if you know about them. A full rundown of record retention periods for individual records can be found at the New York State Archives of Retention and Disposition Guides. Some records are permanent. And keep this in mind. Every record, anything that you write down is a foilable record. People can ask for it. I mean, if you write down something in your office, unless it's maybe a calculation or something, it's a foilable record. So make sure that you think about the kind of things that you write down. And I'm not telling you not to write this stuff down, not to keep record of it. I'm just saying make sure that you understand that everything that you do in the process of your job is probably foilable. So month 1, January, if you're new to the superintendent's office, the first 90 days, you have to log your hours for the New York State retirement system. If you've done that in the past, if this is not your first year, then you have to reconfirm I did it to the town clerk that your duties have essentially not changed from your previous reporting. And you want to make sure that you do that every year, because the New York State retirement system will want to know that, to make sure that you're working the number of hours that are required for you to be a member of the New York State retirement system. Since you as a superintendent aren't probably required to have a certain number of hours that you do to perform your job, they want to make sure that you're not getting paid to do minimal amount of work. If you're a highway superintendent, a town highway superintendent, it's time to appoint or reappoint your deputy highway superintendent. You can't say enough. You want to make sure that you do this. If your municipality allows for a deputy highway superintendent and you don't appoint one, the town board can appoint one for you. So it would be in your best interest to make sure that you do your duty and have a deputy highway superintendent in place, and make sure that they take the oath of office just as you do, because they're going to work in your stead if you become unable or unavailable to do your job as highway superintendent. Say you go out of the country on a vacation, and somebody has to step up and do your job. That would be your deputy's job. Remember that it doesn't necessarily have to be a highway employee, although often it is. It doesn't have to be. It can be someone else. It could be your spouse. The only thing is, you have to remember, is the town board is responsible for the amount of money that they get paid for doing that position, and they may not agree to pay someone that's outside of the department for that. Your 284 agreement. I think that we're probably going to put that up there. You want to make sure that your 284 agreement is completed and in place. before you spend any money on highway projects. There are a number of things that have to be in place with the 284 agreement. For instance, if you decide that you're going to hire somebody within the department to come into the department and you don't have a 284 agreement in place, you're not legally allowed to hire anybody without that agreement in place. A lot of people don't know that. The one thing about the 284 agreement, it can be modified, and maybe modified as many times as you need to. Last year before I retired, we had some horrific flooding in our town, 2 weeks in a row, two 500-year events, 2 weeks in a row. And we modified that 284 agreement 7 times that year. You have to do what you have to do. And as long as, your board is willing to agree on that and you put it in place, you're all good. Keep in mind, you can't spend more money than your 284 agreement calls for. So if you spend more than that, especially in line items, you could be responsible for that. Keep that in mind. So you manage all aspects of the right-of-way: drainage, bridges, culverts, ditches, storm sewers if you're in the village, or if you're a bigger urban town. You're responsible for road surface, potholes, traffic markings, signage. Could very well be traffic markings. You're responsible for hazards. And this is one of the big things when we talk about liability. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to things such as trees, and we're supposed to get a lot of wind today, and at least in our area of the state, and I think over most of the state, they're going to get some high winds. Trees are a big deal, especially with the death of all the ash trees with the emerald ash borer. If they're in or close to your right of way, it'd probably be conducive for you to get some of that stuff removed, because at some point, and we'll talk about notice, you kind of have constructive notice. If you see trees are dead, or you see things that are falling off into the right of way, you can pretty much guess that the rest of it is going to too. So you could be liable for some of those things. You're responsible for fixed objects that are in the right of way. A lot of people put obstructions in the right of way. You see that picture of that fancy brick mailbox. It kind of is, it's a hazard. Somebody just deviates from the roadway just a little bit and they're into that mailbox. It's the kind of thing that you have to keep a sharp eye out. People put stuff they think they own to the center of the road because they allegedly pay taxes to the center of the road. You want to make sure that you're careful about where they put things, especially at intersections where there's sight distance issues. People plant trees, they put up fences. Be aware of the things that they do. Utilities, poles, the utility companies like to put poles up pretty much everywhere. Make sure that they put them in the least obstructive and the least dangerous spots. Let them be putting a lot of poles on the outside corners of bends in the road where obviously people tend to gravitate to if they lose control.
Marty,
Yes.
we do have a question.
Okay.
Does the 284 agreement apply to villages and cities too?
It does not. This is a town government thing that has to be in place. It does not apply to cities or villages. You're responsible for snow and ice. Obviously, this is the time of year, and a lot of us just received our first probably appreciable snowfall of the season, which is kind of unusual unless you're our brethren up in the North Country. It's kind of the first little dusting of snow, and isn't much. But I would encourage all of you, and I don't know how many of you have written winter maintenance policies, but I would encourage you to have one. And you'll say, well, what is a written winter maintenance policy? Essentially, it tells people and what people can expect from your department. If you're doing it the same every single time, every event, you're doing the same thing. We go out at 4 o'clock in the morning and we try to have all of our runs covered by time the school buses go at 7 o'clock or 6:30 or whatever it might be. If you're doing it over and over the same way, I would encourage you to write it down. Get a winter maintenance policy, because it's better for you to decide what your policy is than it is to have some judge decide what your policy is. If you don't have a bare roads policy, and most smaller municipalities do not, you want to make sure that you tell them what time of the day you're going to be off road. Maybe you're going to maintain your right of way till 8 o'clock at night, and then you're going to start again at 4 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning. Those are the kind of things that you should know, because if you don't, some judge will say, well, why are your roads not bare? Well, it's because we don't do that. Well, where does it say that? I would encourage you to have a written winter maintenance policy, and the local roads program has a number of them that are, usable for you to look at, not necessarily copy, but you can modify them to suit your needs. I would encourage you, if you don't have one, I would encourage you to get one.
Marty, we have another question about the picture that you just had up. It said, should you require that residents remove hazards like the mailbox in your picture, or should you at least send them a letter that it is a hazard?
I would think that would be the very minimal thing you should do, is make sure that they're aware of what they're doing, and make sure that there's notice. You're giving them notice that what they've done is a hazard. And if you can see it when they start to do it, it would be conducive for you to have them stop doing it. I mean, a postal receptacle is only there for the convenience of the homeowner and the mail department. They don't really have any legal right to be able to. They have a given right, but not a legal right to put anything in there that could be considered a hazard. And I see some of them that are pretty impressive, as you travel the state, and especially you travel the country. Some of them are extremely impressive. I see people putting outboard motors, they're putting them on by the road, and maybe they're big fishing people. And I tell you what, you hit one of those with a car and it goes through the windshield, somebody's going to be seriously injured or killed. And those are the kind of things that you should be aware of, and you should make sure that the people are aware of what they're doing. And if they have some real issues with it, it might be the kind of thing where you might have to contact their insurance agent and let them know that what they've done there. And it's the kind of thing that sometimes, if they're a little belligerent, their insurance agent will be more than happy to help you get that removed. So we talked earlier about notice, prior written notice of a defect. There are some laws in New York State that will help protect you, especially if you're a town person, in the event that there's an incident. And I don't want to call them, I guess we'll call it a crash. We're not going to call it an accident, because they really aren't accidents, they're crashes. If somebody gets hurt, or if somebody trips on a sidewalk, or if there's no prior written notice of the defect, the municipality can't be sued for it. Now, that being said, the towns, there's a local law that has to be passed to make sure that you get full protection from the prior written notice law. Villages get it automatically. The county gets a partial immunity from written notice, or lack thereof. Actual notice is written notice. And it could be in the form of a letter sent to your department. It could be in the form of an email. They can't just call you on the phone and say, hey, there's a problem up here. I'm not saying that you shouldn't respond to those issues, but I'm saying it's not considered notice. So it might be the kind of thing that if somebody said, or calls you up and said, hey, there's a problem up here on XYZ road, and you go up and look at it, or you maybe don't go up and look at it, and the next day that problem on XYZ road ends up in a crash, it's not considered notice. So if you've been given notice and you don't do anything about it, and I'm going to tell you about that too. If you've been given notice of something, you better do something about it. And I mean, you want to, not only do you want to do something about it, you want to make note of what you've done, and you present that to your town clerk or whoever's responsible for those records. They have to be kept on file. It could be a village clerk, whoever is responsible for those written notices. They have to be kept in a specific file folder. And whatever you do to correct those issues, even if it's a short-term thing, you know, putting up barriers or a Jersey barrier or a road cone or whatever it might be, you want to make sure that all of those things, until you come to an actual remediation, you've taken care of the problem, all have to be put along with that written notice so that it will protect you. There's constructive notice, and I talked to you a little bit about that, about the trees. You see them, you know, there's trees that are falling down, and you go by, or there's a pothole that's along the shoulder of the road just as you turn into your highway garage, and you're going to your highway garage pretty much 250 days a year. Well, you should have seen that pothole. You should have known. So you had constructive notice that it's there. That's notice. Make sure that if you're traveling your roads every week, and you should be, or you should have somebody appointed to be doing that every week. Make sure that you're paying attention to what's within your right of way to reduce your liability. That somebody's paying attention to those things, and if you see those things and you know that they're there, then you've been given notice. Law enforcement. If you get a call from the sheriff's department or the state police and say there's a problem up here on XYZ road, it's notice. It's complete notice. So make sure at that point you do something just as if it was written notice. You're responsible for payroll and vouchers. Keep accurate employee records. Maybe you have a payroll clerk that does the time records. Maybe you have a punch clock for time. Pay attention, keep good, accurate records of time off. You're responsible for vouchers. I talked about that earlier. You're responsible for bids, quotes. Make sure you know your procurement policy. How much can you spend without getting a board approval? You know, I would hope. If you haven't been at it a long time, I mean, I see there was nobody had been here less than a year, so I would assume that we have no newbies that started in January 1. So if that's the case, then you probably at this point should know what your procurement policy is. As I teach running your highway departments across the state, there are a number of people that can't spend $5 without getting board approval. I mean, your hands are pretty much tied at that. There's probably a reason. Somebody probably abused their authority, and the board says, you know what, you're not spending anything without getting approval from us. I don't know. I mean, if you can't fix a hydraulic hose in the middle of a snowstorm without getting board approval, and sometimes you know how difficult that might be, well, then you're done. So, I mean, most procurement policies are put in place to protect the municipality, but they also are probably put in place to kind of protect you, I guess, maybe keep you from doing things that you shouldn't be. Remember that if you overspend an account without proper approval, you could be responsible for that amount in excess of the budget appropriation. Keep that in mind. I mean, it could be grounds for dismissal. Restricting and closing roads. Town and county superintendents can only make a temporary closure for construction or emergencies by Highway Law 104. So if you're going to take put in a new cross culvert or something like that, that's going to be down for a long time or down for a specific amount of time, you can close that road. Make sure that you pay attention to detours and notifying the people on the road, but you can do a temporary closure. Make sure that people like emergency management and the schools and the residents know exactly what you have in place. Long-term closures, we had, I spoke about the flooding that we had there the year before I retired. We had some roads that were closed for weeks. We had 7 roads the first week that were impassable. You couldn't drive on them. There was one that the center of the road was 9 feet lower than it was before the storm. It's the kind of thing that you can't get back together in a very short amount of time. So we had one that was closed the lion's share of the summer in order to get it back to where it belonged. Those long-term closures are done by the supervisor or the chairman of the board of legislature, whoever the CEO or of the municipality is, whoever's responsible for running the municipality. It could be the mayor in a village. They're the ones that are responsible for closing roads long term. Make sure that and you may have specific localized rules that apply to this if you're a village or you're a city. So make sure you understand what your roles are in that sort of thing. Managing liability. It's impossible to eliminate all liability. The only thing you're able to do is minimize your exposure by keeping a sharp eye out for defects in the highway, equipment maintenance. Watch your interactions with the public. As time goes on, everything is recordable. I mean, and everybody has a video recorder in their pocket anymore. I mean, and it seems to be the thing to do now. Any kind of interaction, people get their cell phone out and their smartphone and it's, I don't know, they don't always do it for the right reasons, but they do it. And you have to be aware that whenever you're doing anything at all in the public, you could be being recorded. You may not even know it, but you probably could be. So keep that in mind. Be respectful. Train your employees to be respectful and to work safely, and to make sure that they're aware of. And if people sometimes will start these interactions that are not necessarily conducive to a good outcome, but make sure that your guys understand, your people understand that anything can be kicked up the hill. You say, well, I'm not really sure. That's above my pay grade. You really probably need to talk to the superintendent or the DPW head. I'll give you his number. You can call him. And when they call you, make sure that you keep that same cool head. And if people get irate, say, look, if you keep this, this foul mood up, I'm going to hang up, and when you get so that you're in a better frame of mind to discuss this, I'll be more than happy to discuss it with you. And when you get to the point where you can discuss this rationally, I'll be more than happy to have a talk with you. Don't stoop to the level. Make sure that you're aware of that. You're responsible for annual reports, state contracts. You get fuel through the state contract. You get salt. Have local contracts, maybe for gravel or stone or whatever it might be. You're responsible for your CHIPS reports, the road mileage reports that you have to fill out every year. You're responsible for bridge and large diameter culvert inspections, spring and fall. Make sure that you're in the spring of the year before the vegetation starts, that you're keeping an eye on your culverts to make sure. And it doesn't necessarily mean it all has to be you, but it might be one of those days when you want to kick the troops out of the shop and go out and have them inspect the entrance ends of all those culverts, and maybe the discharge ends as well. and make a note of those things, not just look at them, but make a note of them. And when, things are conducive, you send out an excavator and you get those things cleaned up, or if somebody runs over the end of it, smashed down, make sure that you get a way to jack it up or whatever it might be to make it sure that it's working to its full capacity. Sign inspections, semi-annual, spring and fall. Make sure you're keeping an eye on that. Make sure that all those records are kept. The number one litigated thing in municipal is signs. Make sure that you're keeping an eye on them. Make sure that you can see them at night. I mean, your guys are out there now this time of year, they're out there with trucks in the wintertime. Make sure if there's a sign they can't see anymore, it's lost its reflectivity. Make sure that they make a note of it so that whoever's responsible for signs can take care of that. Get those signs ordered so that when the weather's better, they can get out there and take care of them. Machinery inventory, September for towns. You're going to have to present that to your town clerk. It may have to go to the county superintendent as well, depending on your county's superintendent's request. He may want to be in the loop on that. Maybe for future purchases, it could be one of those things that they send on to emergency management in the case of a major event. What you'd be available to pony up. Your SH 900 sickness and accident reports for PESH. Make sure that those are in place and posted as they should be. Because if they show up, if PESH shows up, it's one of the things that you'll get dinged for if you don't have it in place. Personnel policies. I assume everyone has one. You are required by law to have one. If your employer is involved in a union, they may be covered under a binding labor agreement, so be sure your personnel policy doesn't conflict with it. The local roads program has a number of personnel policies that they have on file over there. At the very least, you should be looking at these every year to make sure that they're up to date, and they are going to include things like time off and what kind of hospitalization they might be required, or the municipality might be providing. It could be things as time off, call-ins, sick time. All of those things should be a part of your personnel policy. Some of them have things as smoking in vehicles. It's part of the personnel policy. I don't want people smoking in the municipality's vehicles. I mean, first of all, it's not their vehicle, it belongs to the taxpayers. Cell phones. You guys have a cell phone policy? It might be one of those things that, I mean, they're operating vehicles that are extremely heavy. They don't stop as quickly as an automobile. First of all, they don't need to be checking Facebook while they're on duty. I mean, that's the kind of thing you do at lunchtime or a break time or after work. They don't need to be doing it when they're supposed to be on the clock. Keep that in mind. So if you don't have one, they have some of the Cornell local roads. If you do have one, make sure you pay attention to it, and may need some review. It may need some updates. Things change. Things are not the same as they used to be, especially with all the happenings as far as litigation goes. Equipment management. You're responsible for purchases. You're responsible for the maintenance of it. You may have if you're a bigger municipality, maybe you have a specific crew that does maintenance. They may have your own shop that does that kind of thing. But essentially, you as a department head are responsible for that kind of thing. You're responsible for that maintenance. You go to get rid of it, you're responsible for the disposal of it. Whether you send it to an auction or you put it up for sealed bid or to get rid of it, you're responsible for all of that. Premature failure. And why does equipment fail? Well, maybe you have the wrong equipment for the job. Maybe it's overworked. Maybe if you're working in a gravel pit and you're screening gravel and you should have a 4-yard loader, but you're using a 2.5-yard loader, and you're running it half again as hard as you should to try to keep the screening plant from running out of material, you probably got the wrong equipment in place. You're overworking it. Lack of maintenance. Well, it goes without saying, you know, it's grease is cheaper than parts. My grandfather taught me that when I was a young kid. Make sure you take care of your stuff. If you're not using it, keep it inside under cover so that the sun's not on it. It keeps it in good shape longer. The tires don't weather check as much. They don't crack because the sun's on them all the time. If you have room to keep the stuff inside, keep it inside under cover. Plus, if it's inside, there's a lot less chance that there's going to be vandalized. And I'm going to tell you right now, the way things are right now, vandalism can be a problem. And if there's a way for them to get to the batteries, you leave them there any length of time, they'll be gone. Well, batteries aren't cheap like they used to be. You know, you can buy a battery for $40 and now battery's $100. So you can bet that if you don't take care of your stuff, somebody else will take care of it for you. It can be poor operation. Make sure you train your people well. Make sure that they understand how to operate things. Give them proper time to learn those things. Don't put them in an excavator and put them up next to your new $270,000 10-wheeler and with aluminum or stainless steel body and have them run into the side of it. Make sure that they're good at what they do before you put them in delicate situations. And age, things just age out over time. That's what happens. Pay attention to those things. And when we talk about, you know, planning, make sure that you have plans in place to replace the aging stuff at a certain point. You know, it's not easy anymore. Equipment's getting more and more expensive as we go along. And then there's accidents. $70 miles an hour on a Kansas interstate. Somebody didn't shut the machine off or lock the machine out so that the boom raised up, and as a result, I can't even imagine what that bridge is going to cost. Budgets, account funds, ledger codes, object codes. One of the most difficult things when I first started as highway superintendent, making sure that I understood how to categorize these things when I was putting them through to the town clerk. A is general. DA and DB are town highway. DB is if you have a village within the town. D and DM is county. So county roads is D, and DM is county machinery. H is capital projects. Ledger codes. A's are supervisors. Administration's 5110. If you're a highway superintendent, that's where you get paid from. 5120 is engineering. 5132 is buildings and grounds. 3310 are signs. Rest of them, the town guys, probably if you've been there a year, you know all the rest of those. Object codes. Personnel is 1, 2 is equipment and capital expenses. 0.4 is contractual, materials and invoice. 0.6 is debt principal. 0.7 debt interest. 0.8 is employee benefits. Which ledger code do you think that is? Well, if you said A3310 and signs, that's exactly right. Your supervisor is responsible. This is one of his funds, but you're responsible for the care and maintenance of them. Keep good records when you do sign repair and inspections. Which ledger code do you think this would be? Which account? Well, if you said 5110, it would be a repair. And you're probably right. It looks like they're doing some repair. But since it's over 5 feet in diameter, it could very well be a 5120 in a bridge. Which ledger code do you think this would be? It's like a nice chip seal here on a rural road. Could be a 5110 in repairs, or since CHIPS allows for that sort of thing, single service streets, it could be a 5112 capital, could be a CHIPS project. Which ledger code do you think this would be? Mowing the town hall. You're right. A5132 buildings and grounds. And keep in mind that if you're doing things that are outside of the general repair, if you're mowing the town hall, or if you're working on a water and sewer project, or if you have your guys in parks or in cemeteries, make sure that their time is billed to the appropriate account. Because if you don't, you're actually breaking the law. Make sure that those things are billed to the appropriate, because if you're working on the town hall by mowing the grass and you're billing it to the general repair, you're not billing it out of the proper fund. You're doing the municipality a disservice, and it's against the law. So budget estimates. Zero-based budgeting means where you start from scratch every year. Say, okay, now we're going to do our 5112 or our 5110. We're going to start with 0, and this is what we're going to have for this project and project B and project C. It's very time consuming unless you're like a Tim Hunt from one of my buddies, Tim Hunt. I don't even know that that's a possibility for most people. You might be able to do it if you had the correct help, but it's very time consuming, and it's probably out of the realm of possibility for most, myself included. If you want to choose one line item per year and start from scratch, start there. I used historical averaging, what we had spent in previous years, and I added a not necessarily a cost of living. I use the CPI, Consumer Price Index, because it's a little closer to what we normally spend our money on. Cost of living, not really so much, but consumer price much better. Life cycle planning. A truck's going to last for 10 years maybe in your department, or 15 years in your department. I can't really tell you. Every department's different, but you should plan out what it's going to cost over the life of it. How much is it going to cost you every year? And they should be plugged into your long-term, and everyone knows that things are not getting any cheaper. It's more expensive all the time. So lifestyle planning may be a thing. And when I talk about planning, and I've talked about it a lot already today, make sure you have those plans in place. A 5-year plan for roads, or a 10-year plan for roads, or a 5-year plan for equipment, or a 10-year plans for equipment. Make sure you have those things in place, because it'll help you long term, not only for budgeting, but it'll help you achieve a goal. Budget cycle. T-minus 3 months. Budget department, you get your budget to the budget department, to your supervisor, to your village clerk. T-minus 2 months, you have a tentative budget in place. T-minus 1.5 months, you're going to have a public hearing on the budget. Adopt your final budget. We always did it the meeting right after election day. If there wasn't any disagreement to it, they usually approved our final budget. And then the 1st of January started, or the 1st of June, depending on where you're at. Scheduling work. First of all, you got to determine what work is needed. You're going to plan those activities that go along with that work. You're going to calculate the cost. Am I going to have enough money to do these projects? You're going to implement the work. And don't be like these guys here. They spent all that time putting all those balusters up. I think this happened right after 9/11. We're going to do everything we can to protect our facilities. And then they realized, oh no, we got to get the truck out of here. Yeah. Not necessarily a lot of planning there. So when you're scheduling work, you want to get a plan. And those things might include things like 811. You're going to make sure that you have your stuff in place to make sure that everything is marked out. You want to know, do we have a culvert to put in? If we take the old one out, do we have gravel to compact? We have is our tamper working? Is everything as it should be? If you're putting in a culvert, make sure you have a plan together so that and make sure that you're gonna have personnel in place to do it. You're gonna mobilize the stuff to the build site, gonna get everything where it needs to be. It may include things like putting up your signage and that sort of thing, detours. You're gonna do the project, put in that culvert, pave that road, do those things. And pay attention to this one. You're gonna clean up, right? You're gonna clean up when you get done. Don't leave things in the right of way that are gonna be a liability. And I'm gonna tell you, things aren't always what they are, but it's what they appear to be. If you're doing a good job cleaning up after you do a project, things aren't laying around forever, it isn't graded up and it isn't seeded down. People notice that kind of thing more than the good work you do. It's a small part of the whole project, but it pays big dividends if you take good care of things. It isn't what things are, it's what they appear to be. And evaluate what you could have done better. Make sure that you are doing things as efficiently and as effectively as you can. So the typical process, you're going to make sure you have the inventory. You're going to check the condition of that inventory and what the condition is the project you're going to do. If it's a culvert replacement, or is what condition the road is in. Do we need to do core samples, that sort of thing? But does it need a major rehabilitation, or can we do an overlay on it? The repairs, what kind of repairs are going to be in place? Have to prioritize. What's more important? Is it this more important than the next project? Make sure that you have those things in place. And normally all of these things a lot of this stuff is going to be spelled out in your 284 agreement, what we're going to do in the coming months. And then you're going to implement, you're going to do after you prioritize and make sure you have your stuff in place, decide what your repairs are going to be, then you're going to implement and do the project. So you're going to have an inventory of roads, and you know what that is because you're doing that every year for CHIPS. Bridges and culverts. Do you have an inventory of those? Do you know what you have? All of ours in the town of Reading were all GPS located. The materials they were made out of. If we knew when they were put in, that was put in there as well. Those are the kind of things that you should have. The same with our signs. You know how many signs you have? You know what condition they're in? Should. You're supposed to be doing inspections twice a year. Ours were all GPS located. So if we ever got into a litigation issue, they say, well, there's no sign here. Well, there was a sign here. It was at 3146 North. That's what it kind of amounts to. Make sure you know what you have. How much guide rail do you have? You know how many feet you have? What kind of equipment? If you're a town guy, you're going to have to do that in September. And miscellaneous items. What else do you have? How about tools, small tools, tampers, those kind of things? It's because the balance of these things should be recorded for budgeting purposes. Those are the sort of things that if you know what you have, you know what the long-term costs are to replace it, it helps you when you go to put a budget together. And what are the condition of your roads? I use the coffee cup method for determining the road. If you fill up a good hot cup of coffee and you take off to start checking your roads, some roads you could drive down them perfectly fine and drink your coffee, put it in the cup holder. You're not going to have to worry about spilling it in your new truck. Well, some roads you turn on, you might want to pick that coffee cup up and put it in your hand so that it's, your hand is like the gyro to keep it from spilling. And some roads, you turn on them, you might better just dump the coffee out because there's no way you're going to navigate it without them. You kind of hope that yours aren't that way. I had one that was like that until just shortly before I retired. So yeah, that was my method for conditioning. There's all kinds of things that you can do to do that. Cornell actually offers a program where you can get college students, I think they still do it, the camp program, where they can come out and they can evaluate your roads and tell you what the condition is. Purchasing. We talked earlier about your procurement policy. Direct purchases. How much can you spend? Without getting a quote. Oral quotes. And I say oral quotes, it could work at one time, but it really isn't that big a deal to get written quotes. I would prefer it. I tried to do it. It's much better to get a couple written quotes, and these days you can get a good share of it on the internet. You don't even have to have an oral quote. If you get 2 or 3 quotes off the internet and somebody local says, well, this is, what I can do it for, well, maybe the local guy's better. First of all, it's there. There's no shipping involved with it. Written quotes, know what the number is. Make sure that you have what the threshold is before you have to go to bid. There are exceptions in the event of a disaster declaration, an emergency declaration. You can forego the bidding process. I wouldn't encourage you to do that. In our emergency declarations, the year we had the flooding, I still got quotes from a number of different purchases for large shot rock and for riprap. And I did all of those, over the phone and had them faxed to my office or emailed to me. You can get away without doing that. There are exceptions to that as well. Professional services like a engineering or architecture work. You don't have to go to bid for that. You still could probably get quotes. Good specifications. Make sure when you write your specifications are exactly what you get what you're asking for. Make sure that that's the way it works. Snow and ice control. I talked to you earlier about that. Make sure you have a winter maintenance policy in place if you feel comfortable with it. I would encourage you to do it. There's no reason not to. We've had ours in place for a number of years at the town of Reading. It's been modified and updated over the years, but never had an issue with having it in place. I talked to you earlier about public interactions. Pay attention to what you say and who you say it to, because it could end up biting you. You're responsible for standard operating procedures. Make sure you have them in place for every task that your municipality does. I wouldn't encourage this kind of activity here. What's wrong in this picture? A number of things. No trench boxes, no shoring. Most of the workers with no hard hats on, no PPE. There's a lot of things that are wrong with this. Make sure you have a standard operating procedure for every task that your department does, so that there's no confusion. These guys, supposedly professionals, they look like to me not a guy with a hard hat on. It's not one of those big rocks there that's gonna cause them trouble, because if they get with a big rock, it's pretty much over. But a 1-pound rock that falls off that same hillside will kill them just as dead. Make sure that people are aware of the safety protocols in your department. Emergencies. They're exactly what they are. They're 3.4 inches of rain, 3.14 inches of rain in 25 minutes. They cause the kind of things you see here. That's what happened with us. That was 1 week. The next week we had 3.08 inches of rain in 20 minutes. 2 500-year events back to back, 6 days apart. It's the kind of thing that can discourage you. They can test your resolve. They're the reason you're either successful in what you do or not. The face you put on for the public is going to determine whether you have your long-term at what you do or your short-term at what you do. So I would encourage you to have a plan in place for these kind of things. You can't always plan them, but have a plan in place for how you're going to react in each one of these situations. So I teach running your highway department. These are the things we covered today in a very short amount of time. I normally do it in 6.5 hours. I go into much more detail. We're going to be teaching this spring in a number of places in the state. You can see, if you see where one of these that's close enough to you, I would encourage you to come in and see me and talk to me. There's a lot of things that we probably didn't get a chance to talk about today, especially in the short amount of time that we have to do it. It's cheap. It's cheap entertainment to come and spend a day with me. And if you're in the area, I would encourage you to do that. There's upcoming webinars. I was the first one of the year. The 23rd is road and street legal issues. The 30th is worker safety. The 6th is culverts. The 13th is finding, retaining, and motivating employees. A big deal right now. Big deal. February 20th, work zones. February 27th, purchasing and financing. That's one that I would really encourage you to do. The 5th, surface and subsurface drainage, and the 12th is pavement maintenance. These are all important things, especially if you're a newbie. These are the kind of things that will help make you successful in what you do. So I'm going to be teaching running your highway department the 19th in Nassau County, the 20th in Ulster County, and the 21st in Rensselaer County. I'm going to be teaching rights and responsibility April 2nd in Monroe County, April 3rd in Erie County, and April 4th in Steuben County. April 30th, Mike Nowak's going to be teaching it in Warren County. The 1st is going to be teaching it in St. Lawrence County, and the 2nd he's going to be teaching it in Oswego County. I would encourage you to get into one of these workshops. We will help you understand your rights and responsibilities, right? So that's all we have for today. Looks like I'm hit it right at exactly at 10 o'clock. Thank you for taking the time to listen today and interact. Good luck on your 2024 season. Hopefully the wind isn't too strong today and the water doesn't get too deep. And I will catch all of you guys again, and hopefully I'll get to see you in one of my workshops.
Thank you, Marty, for presenting today, and thank you for logging in and spending your morning with us. The recording and all of the documents Marty talked about throughout the webinar will be posted later today or tomorrow, so you can head over to our website if you missed anything or need to download anything. And with that, have a good afternoon or morning. We're in morning. Have a good morning. Thanks again, Marty.
So long.